It was a time of true paranoia, tells Monika Schneider, mother of 3 children from Waldstadt. We lived in constant fear. Nobody knew who to be afraid of because it was about a child. How do you explain to your own children that they must be wary of their peers? In early June, the police discovered a strange room in the basement of an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. In the small windowless room, there were children's toys, ropes, several knives and stains that turned out to be blood from various animals after analysis. On one of the walls, a carefully drawn plan of the neighborhood was found, on which the houses where the incidents took place were marked with crosses. The police intensified their investigations, but found no fingerprints or other traces that could have identified the perpetrator. On the 20th of June, the most serious case occurred. Sophia Wagner, 5 years old, who lived in house number 17 on Linden Street, was found unconscious in her own garden. She spent 28 hours in a coma. After waking up, she was in a state of great fear and refused to speak. Only after a week of work with a child psychologist could Sophia tell that a clever boy from school had suggested she play an experiment. He gave her a magic juice to drink, from which she felt sleepy. The last thing she remembered was how the boy took strange tools from his backpack and said he wanted to see how she sleeps. The police investigations reached a dead end. The parents were in panic. At an emergency meeting of the district council, it was decided to introduce a curfew for children under 14 years old and install additional surveillance cameras. However, nobody could suspect that the solution to all these incidents lay in house number 15 on the same Linden Street, only 2 houses away from the last victim. In this house lived the Schwarz family, exemplary in every respect. The father, Markus Schwarz, worked as an engineer in an automotive company. The mother, Helga Schwarz, taught literature at the gymnasium. Their son, 9-year-old Lukas, was an excellent student, played violin and was considered one of the most promising students in his class. The younger daughter, 4-year-old Hannah, attended kindergarten. The family regularly participated in community life, organized summer barbecues for the neighbors, and attended church on Sundays. Lukas always seemed somewhat strange, but in a positive sense, remembers Goethe Müller, a neighbor of the Schwarz family. Very intelligent, polite, always greeted the adults, exceptionally developed for his age, sometimes too serious for his age. I remember how he once helped me carry groceries and explained in detail why certain types of plastic bags take longer to decompose, such knowledge at 9 years old. On the 27th of June 2019, after physical education at Waldstadt Middle School, an incident occurred that ended the series of mysterious events in the neighborhood. Lukas Schwarz forgot his mobile phone in the changing room. The device remained unlocked. Timo Berger and Felix Koch, classmates of Lukas, found a phone in the changing room after physical education. On the screen was an open photo gallery. At first, we just wanted to find out whose phone it was to return it, Timo later told the police report. I saw the photos and thought they were special effects or staged shots for a school project. Felix immediately recognized that something was wrong. On the phone screen was a recently taken photo of a deceased cat, arranged in anatomical order with carefully separated internal organs. Next to it lay surgical instruments, tweezers, scalpel, scissors. When the boys continued scrolling through the gallery, they saw about 20 similar images with various animals. Each series was accompanied by carefully written notes recording date, time, instruments used, and observations. I got scared and wanted to turn off the phone, Felix remembered. But then we saw the video. Lukas was filming how he gave the neighbor's daughter something to drink. She became sleepy, and he commented on every phase as if he were conducting a scientific experiment. His voice sounded normal, like in biology class when he answered at the blackboard. The shocked boys showed the discovery to their sports teacher, Michael Wagner. He immediately took the phone and brought it to the school principal. After reviewing the content, the police were called. At 14:22 on the same day, Lukas Schwarz was arrested directly at school and brought to the police station for questioning in the presence of his parents and a psychologist. Lukas' reaction to the arrest was unusual, notes investigator Klaus Hoffmann in his report. He showed no emotions whatsoever, neither fear nor anger or remorse. It seemed as if he were observing the arrest process with interest, as if watching a documentary film. During the search of Lucas' room, the police discovered the first substantial evidence of his involvement in the incidents in the district. Under a floorboard at the desk, a hiding place with a metal box was set up. It contained several pet collars, children's toys, personal items of the affected children, small bottles with unknown liquids, and a USB stick. The contents of the USB stick shocked even experienced investigators. On it was a carefully organized archive in which each experiment was dedicated a separate folder. These contained photos, videos, and text documents with detailed reports. Lucas documented everything: planning, selection of the object, implementation, observations, and conclusions. Particularly disturbing was that in these records he never used the children's names, only numbers of the objects and their basic characteristics: age, gender, approximate weight. This was not simply cruelty for cruelty's sake, comments Dr. Eva Kramer, forensic psychiatrist who later worked with Lucas. In his actions, a clear methodology was recognizable. He consistently made his experiments more complex, progressed from animals to humans, from simple observations to active manipulations. Every step was carefully documented. Such systematics is extremely unusual for a child of his age. Lucas' parents were in a state of deep shock. "We don't understand how this could happen," said Marcus Schwartz during the first interrogation. "Lucas was always a quiet, obedient boy. Yes, sometimes withdrawn, but isn't that normal for an intelligent child? He never showed aggression, had friends at school, got along well with his sister." However, further investigation brought disturbing details to light. Teachers remembered several episodes that at the time did not attract due attention. At 7 years old, Lucas wrote an essay about what happens to people when they fall asleep and cannot control their body. At 8 years old, he asked the school nurse detailed questions about the effects of various medications. Shortly before his arrest, he had completed a research project on the topic, poisonous plants of our region, with very good marks. On the 1st of July 2019, during the continued search in the Schwartz family house, the police made another shocking discovery. In the basement, behind a shelf with preserves, a small camouflaged door was found. It led to a room of about 6 square meters with soundproofing. In it was a locked wooden chest. What we found in the chest forced us to reconsider the scope of the entire case, remembers investigator Hoffman. We thought we were dealing with a child who showed cruelty toward animals and intimidated other children. The contents of the chest showed that everything was much more serious. In the chest, Lucas' collection was discovered, systematized trophies from each victim, not only animal collars and personal items from children, but also biological samples, dried tissue fragments, organs of small animals preserved in formalin, test tubes with blood. Each exhibit was carefully marked, provided with date and code designation. On the inside of the chest lid was pasted a sheet of paper with the inscription, "Research into the boundaries of fear, interim results." Among the objects in the chest, police discovered a voice recorder with recordings of interviews that Lucas had conducted with his victims. On one of the recordings, he can be heard methodically questioning a 6-year-old boy about his fears, then describing how he wants to check the reaction of his organism to these fears, and calmly recording the results. Psychologists and psychiatrists who were brought into the case faced a rare and complex case. We very rarely see such a combination of high intelligence, complete lack of empathy, and methodology at such a young age, explains Dr. Heinrich Müller, head of psychiatric assessment in the Lucas case. Most children with similar tendencies act impulsively, do not hide their behavior, quickly come into the field of view of psychologists. Lucas, on the other hand, created a well-thought-out system that allowed him to operate unnoticed for several months. Meanwhile, the picture of a double life that Lucas led gradually revealed itself. At school, he was an exemplary student, in the family an obedient son. He fulfilled all household duties, helped with caring for his younger sister, and regularly engaged in music. At the same time, he systematically planned and carried out his experiments, recorded the results, and perfected his methods. On the 2nd of July, 2019, Lukas Schwarz was admitted to a specialized closed facility for minors with severe psychological disorders. During the first psychiatric examination, specialists were impressed by his intellectual abilities and the complete absence of emotional reaction to the situation. In IQ tests, Lukas achieved a result of 158, which corresponds to the highly gifted category, notes Dr. Kramer in her assessment. His vocabulary and analytical abilities correspond to the level of a 16 to 17-year-old adolescent. At the same time, he shows a complete lack of empathy, does not understand why his actions are considered unacceptable, and regards his victims exclusively as research objects. In further sessions, Lukas began to speak more openly about his motives. What he told caused psychiatrists to reconsider many concepts about childhood psychopathy. On the 5th of July, 2019, Dr. Eva Kramer conducted the first complete psychiatric interview with Lukas Schwarz. The session was recorded on video for further analysis by a group of specialists. The transcript of this conversation, which was partially published with court approval, reveals a disturbing picture of the boy's thinking. "I don't understand why everyone is so upset," Lukas said at the beginning of the interview. "I only studied reactions. At school, they tell us that science advances through experiments. Nobody blames scientists when they use laboratory rats. I was very careful and documented everything. Isn't this how a real researcher should work?" When Dr. Kramer asked him about his feelings toward the affected individuals, Lukas answered with sincere confusion. "Feelings? I had no special feelings. They were research objects. When you examine bacteria under the microscope, you don't emotionally attach yourself to them, do you? I chose objects that were available and fit the parameters. I had to study how fear manifests in different subjects. Particularly disturbing for the psychiatrists was that Lukas was completely aware of the illegality of his actions. Of course I knew that one must not cause pain to animals or people, he explained. That's why I was careful and left no traces. I understood that adults would not approve of my methods. But sometimes in science one must make certain sacrifices for knowledge. I read biographies of great scientists. Many of them encountered misunderstanding from their contemporaries. Further sessions with Lukas enabled specialists to reconstruct the chronology of the development of his disorder. According to the boy, he began his first experiments at the age of 6 when he discovered a bird's nest in the attic of the house. I wanted to understand how they function, he remembered without any emotions. At first I only observed. Then I became curious what would happen if conditions changed. Lukas' parents, who were questioned after his confessions, remembered several episodes to which they had attached no significance. When the boy was 7 years old, the family hamster died under strange circumstances. Lukas explained that the animal had become sick and the parents believed him. In the same year, the family cat suddenly began to avoid the boy, although it had previously slept in his room. These details, individually insignificant, formed a disturbing picture in retrospective analysis. The classic triad of signs of childhood psychopathy often includes cruelty to animals, pyromania, fascination with fire, and bedwetting, explains Dr. Heinrich Müller. In Lukas' case, we see the first two elements, but with an unusual orientation. He showed no impulsive cruelty, but rather a methodical research approach. His fires were not chaotic actions. He studied the burning properties of various materials and documented the results. This is an atypical, high-functioning form of disorder that was difficult to recognize. On the 12th of July, 2019, investigators discovered another disturbing piece of evidence. On Lukas's computer, they found an encrypted file with a map of the district on which all houses with children under 10 years old were marked. Next to each house there were notes with data about the children living there: age, daily routine, presence of pets, when parents are at home. Houses where children with special needs or psychological problems lived were examined particularly carefully. This was a database of potential victims, explains investigator Hoffman. Some houses were marked as priority. Among them was the house of the Wagner family, where Sophia lived, the last victim. According to the records, Lucas planned to continue his experiments, at least until the end of the year. An interesting detail in Lucas' methodology was how he selected and prepared his victims. According to his diaries and statements from the affected children, he never acted aggressively on first contact. On the contrary, he used his reputation as a smart and polite boy to gain trust. He offered help with homework, shared interesting facts, or showed secret places that he had prepared in advance. "I chose those who are easy to influence," Lucas explained in one of the sessions. "Some children are too suspicious, it's difficult to work with them. Others are too talkative, they might tell their parents. The ideal object should be sufficiently naive, but capable of following instructions. I conducted pre-tests before moving to the main experiment." The pre-tests that Lucas spoke of consisted of simple manipulations. He asked the potential victim to keep a small secret or perform an action that adults normally forbid. If the child agreed, Lucas moved to the next step. He invited them to one of the prepared locations and suggested participating in a special game or scientific experiment. In Sophia Wagner's case, the plan was particularly well thought out. According to entries in Lucas's diary, he prepared for this experiment for more than a month. He befriended the girl, treated her several times with harmless sweets to gain her trust. Gradually, he found out that her parents regularly left her alone in the garden while they prepared dinner. He studied the effect of various plant sedatives by first testing them on small animals to determine the dosage. What happened to Sophia went beyond the previous experiments, notes Dr. Kramer. In his records, Lucas describes this as transition to a new level of research. He planned more invasive methods, which indicates an escalation of his behavior. Had he not been stopped, the consequences could have been tragic. Meanwhile, the doctors examining Lucas faced a medical puzzle. The MRI of the boy's brain showed several anomalies in the development of the limbic system, which is responsible for emotional reactions, and the prefrontal cortex, which is connected with impulse control and decision-making. However, these deviations did not correspond to the typical picture of known mental disorders. We observe a paradoxical combination of hypoactivity in the emotional centers of the brain and hyperactivity in areas responsible for analytical thinking, explains neuropsychologist Dr. Gabriela Richter. This could partially explain his extraordinary intelligence with complete absence of empathy. But what caused such development? Genetic predisposition, environmental influences, or a combination of both? We cannot say with certainty. The genetic analysis revealed no known mutations related to psychopathic tendencies. The family history also provided no clues. No mental disorders or criminal behavior were found in any of Lucas's relatives. Teachers and educators who worked with the boy in early childhood noticed no disturbing signs, except for unusually developed intelligence and a certain detachment. The case of Lucas Schwartz poses complex questions about the nature of childhood psychopathy, says Dr. Muller. Most children with similar tendencies show obvious signs of disorder from an early age: aggression, impulsivity, disciplinary problems. Lucas, on the other hand, showed opposite qualities: self-control, patience, the ability to follow rules. This masked his condition and made him invisible to traditional diagnostic methods. At the end of July 2019, the investigation revealed another disturbing aspect of the case. Analysis of Lucas's internet activity showed that the boy carefully studied the stories of known criminals, forensic methods, and psychological profiles of persons with antisocial personality disorder. He used anonymous browsers and deleted search history, but technical experts were able to reconstruct his digital trail. He was not acting only from inner impulse, explains computer analyst of the Munich police, Stefan Wolf. He was learning, adapting his methods, analyzing the mistakes of known criminals. In his bookmarks were scientific articles about forensic medicine, psychology, and criminology that clearly exceeded the comprehension level of an average adult, let alone a child. One of the most disturbing findings was a document titled Perspective Research Plan for 2019 to 2021. In it, Lucas methodically described how he wanted to develop his experiments, gradually increasing their complexity and duration. The final points of the plan included investigation of long-term psychological effects and limits of physical endurance. On the 25th of July, 2019, a closed court hearing took place in the case of Lucas Schwarz. Taking into account the defendant's age, it was decided to place him in a specialized closed medical facility for minors with severe mental disorders. The court decided that Lucas should remain under constant observation by psychiatrists, at least until he reaches legal age, with subsequent reassessment of his condition. The case of Lucas Schwarz triggered an unprecedented social uproar in Germany on the 2nd of August, 2019, after partial publication of the case files in the press. An emergency meeting of residents took place in Waldstadt. More than 300 people gathered in the auditorium of the local school, demanding explanations from the authorities about how such things could happen unnoticed for several months. The atmosphere at the meeting was heated, recalls Michael Gruber, journalist from Munich News. The parents were simultaneously angry and frightened. Many shouted that the police had remained inactive. Others accused the school of negligence. However, what shocked people most was that Lucas, from a wealthy family, could commit such acts without them suspecting anything. At the meeting, the lead investigator of the case, Klaus Hoffmann, spoke. He explained that Lucas's case represents an extremely rare form of personality disorder, aggravated by extraordinary intelligence. We are accustomed to associating problematic children with visible signs: aggression, poor academic performance, conflicts with peers, he said. Lucas showed none of these signs. On the contrary, his impeccable behavior and academic achievements created the perfect camouflage. The psychological impact on Lucas's victims proved to be severe and long-lasting. By mid-August 2019, 6 children with whom Lucas had interacted were in intensive therapy. Sophia Wagner, the last victim, refused to leave the house and sleep alone. She developed a strong phobia of medications and all drinks offered by adults, even her parents. The children affected by Lucas suffered not only physical trauma, but also a deep disruption of basic trust, explains child psychologist Annika Bauer, who worked with the victims. Particularly traumatic for them is the fact that the danger came from a peer. This destroys their conception of a safe world and their trust in their environment. Particularly difficult was the situation for 4-year-old Hannah Schwarz, Lucas's younger sister. After her brother's arrest, she was temporarily placed under the care of social services while the parents were examined for their ability to ensure her safety. Although no evidence was found of the parents' involvement in their son's actions, authorities feared that Hannah might have become the subject of her brother's experiments. In the thorough examination of Hannah, we found no signs of physical or psychological abuse, reported Dr. Maria Weber, child psychiatrist of the social service. However, disturbing elements appear in her drawings and games. She depicts a secret game that she allegedly played with her brother, where one must be very quiet and not tell Mama and Papa. On the 6th of August, investigators discovered in Lucas's encrypted files a separate folder titled Project H, the first letter of his sister's name. It contained notes about observations of the girl's behavior and plans for a gradual introduction to the experiment. According to these records, Lucas considered his sister an ideal long-term research subject due to constant access and the possibility of observing changes over time. When I asked Lucas about his relationship with his sister, His answer was characteristically detached, recalls Dr. Kramer. He said, "Hannah is interesting from a developmental psychology perspective. I can observe how her fears form and how she reacts to various stimuli. My parents thought I was helping her learn, but in reality I was conducting basic tests of her cognitive functions and emotional reactions." Lucas's parents, Marcus and Helga Schwartz, faced enormous social pressure. After publication of details of the case in the press, they received threats. Unknown persons broke the windows of their house, insulting graffiti appeared on the walls. The family had to temporarily move to relatives in another city. "We still cannot comprehend what happened," said Marcus Schwartz in a rare interview. "How could we live under one roof with Lucas and not notice what was happening? All we saw was a smart, polite boy who did well in school and helped his sister. We ask ourselves every day, what did we do wrong? Could it have been prevented?" Psychologists and psychiatrists analyzing the case are divided in their opinions about the role of the parents. Some experts pointed to possible educational failures, excessive concentration on academic achievements, insufficient attention to emotional development. Other specialists emphasized that the parents became victims of an extraordinarily rare mental disorder of their son, which he masterfully concealed. It is important to understand that recognizing psychopathic tendencies in children is extremely difficult even for specialists, comments Dr. Miller. The traditional signs, rule violations, performance problems, visible aggression were absent in Lucas. On the contrary, his perfect adherence to social norms was part of his camouflage. For an unprepared person, even a loving parent, it is practically impossible to notice such carefully hidden deviations. On the 15th of August, 2019, the Federal Ministry of Health established a special committee to develop new protocols for identifying such cases. Leading psychiatrists, psychologists, and criminologists were brought in to analyze the Lucas Schwartz case and develop more effective methods for early detection. This case forces us to reconsider many established notions, explained Dr. Elizabeth Steiner, head of the commission. We have associated personality disorders in children with bad behavior and low self-control for too long. Lucas's case shows that a high-functioning form of this disorder can manifest quite differently through excessive control, methodology, and manipulation. Meanwhile, specialists working with Lucas in the closed facility noticed disturbing peculiarities of his adaptation. Instead of the typical protest or depression reaction characteristic of children in such a situation, the boy showed clinical interest in his own situation. He views his imprisonment as a new phase of research, states psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Schneider in his report. He keeps detailed records about the facility's operations, staff, and other patients. He asks questions about his diagnosis, not from the position of a patient, but as if he were investigating a scientific problem. He is particularly interested in legal restrictions regarding minors with mental disorders. This last detail particularly troubled the specialists. During therapeutic sessions, Lucas repeatedly inquired about the legal aspects of his situation, maximum possible detention periods, criteria for transfer to an adult facility, release conditions. He showed a deep understanding of legislation that he had obviously studied in advance. In one conversation, he calmly remarked that upon reaching the age of 18, he would have more opportunities for self-realization, reports Dr. Schneider. When I asked what he meant, Lucas replied, "Currently, my research is limited by available resources. In adult life, I will have more freedom for more extensive experiments." This statement, spoken with absolute calm and rationality, raises serious concerns about his long-term prognosis. At the end of August 2019, a medical council presented a preliminary conclusion about Lucas Schwartz's condition. The document stated that the boy shows signs of a rare form of personality disorder aggravated by extraordinarily high intelligence and specific neurobiological anomalies. The doctor's prognosis was cautious. Standard therapy methods showed extremely limited effectiveness, and the boy showed no sincere awareness of the inadmissibility of his actions. "We are dealing with a unique case," concludes Dr. Kramer. "Psychopathic traits in children can usually be corrected through intensive therapy, building emotional bonds, and learning empathy. In Lucas, these methods encounter a fundamental obstacle. His brain seems physically incapable of processing emotional information in a standard way. At the same time, his intelligence allows him to imitate normal emotional reactions, making traditional diagnostics ineffective." On the 5th of September 2019, an incident occurred that prompted the facility administration to review security protocols. One of the nurses discovered that Lucas was collecting and systematizing data about other patients, their diagnoses, medication schedules, and therapy plans. Notes about potentially interesting objects, among other children in the facility, were found in his records. After the discovery of Lucas's records about other patients, the facility management introduced unprecedented security measures. He was moved to an isolated wing. His contacts with other children completely cut off. All objects in his room were checked daily. Access to writing materials strictly controlled. Despite these restrictions, staff noticed that Lucas remained calm and even showed a certain satisfaction with the new conditions. He did not perceive isolation as punishment, but as a form of recognition of his special status, notes Dr. Schneider in his report. In one of the sessions, he explained, "They finally understood that I am different from the other patients. Now I have more time to think without distractions." This reaction shows the ability characteristic of a psychopathic personality to adapt any situation to their inner worldview. On the 12th of October 2019, an incident occurred that troubled the specialists even more. During the weekly examination, a self-made map of the facility with marked camera observation points, the guards' shift change schedule, and a detailed plan of the security system was found among Lucas's personal belongings. Upon investigation, it turned out that he had methodically collected information by observing the daily routine of the staff and asking seemingly harmless questions to technical employees. "He made no escape attempts," explained Security Chief Richard Koch. "It was purely academic research of our system." When asked about the purpose of these records, he replied that he was studying structural flaws in containment systems. According to his words, this helps him understand the nature of restrictions and ways to overcome them on a conceptual level. In November 2019, the Federal Ministry of Health published the first results of the Special Commission's work on the Lucas Schwarz case. The 156-page document contained an analysis of the failures that allowed the situation to escalate unnoticed, as well as recommendations for identifying similar cases in the future. In particular, new screening protocols for school psychologists were proposed, including specially designed tests for detecting high-functioning forms of psychopathy in children with increased intelligence. The Lucas Schwarz case has forced us to reconsider fundamental notions about childhood psychopathy, explained Dr. Steiner at a press conference. "We have focused too long on obvious behavioral markers: aggression, rule violations, impulsivity. The high-functioning form of this disorder can manifest in completely opposite ways: excessive self-control, rule compliance, academic success. It is precisely this camouflage as a perfect child that makes such children practically invisible to traditional diagnostic methods." Meanwhile, in the closed facility, Lucas continued to display unusual behavioral patterns. Despite strict restrictions, he found a way to keep records. He used breadcrumbs instead of pencil and toilet paper instead of notepad. In these notes, confiscated by staff, he analyzed the psychological profiles of his doctors, noting their weaknesses and manipulation strategies. "He has turned his imprisonment into a continuation of his research," comments Dr. Kramer. "Now we have become the research objects, doctors, psychologists, staff." A clear methodology is recognizable in his records: observation, pattern identification, hypothesis testing through minor manipulations, analysis of results. He uses the same scientific principles he applied to his victims, but under new conditions. In January 2020, with court approval, an experimental functional MRI procedure was performed on Lucas's brain, with emotionally charged stimuli. The results confirmed earlier hypotheses. When presented with images of suffering people or animals, the brain regions that are normally activated in empathetic reactions remained practically inactive. At the same time, the centers of analytical thinking showed increased activity. His brain does not process information about the suffering of other beings as an emotional signal, but as abstract data, explains neurobiologist Dr. Marcus Heinz. In the part of the experiment where normal children experience strong emotional discomfort, Lucas showed brain activity patterns characteristic of solving complex mathematical problems. He analyzes suffering intellectually, without emotional component. In March 2020, after several months of intensive therapy, psychiatrists noticed small changes in Lucas's behavior. He began to show signs of cooperation, agreed with assessments of his condition, and expressed willingness to work on himself. However, experienced specialists remain skeptical. We see a classic example of what is called therapeutic mimicry in psychiatry, explains Dr. Muller. A patient with psychopathic traits quickly learns to say what doctors want to hear, to imitate progress. Lucas not only imitates, he studies the structure of therapy itself, determines the criteria by which improvements are evaluated, and methodically demonstrates behavior that meets these criteria. This assessment was confirmed by an incident in April 2020. During group therapy, where Lucas was allowed limited interaction with other patients for the first time in a long time, he showed extraordinary manipulation skills. In a single session, he was able to convince 2 other children to give him personal belongings, reveal confidential information, and agree to a certain experiment the next day. The therapist terminated the session when he noticed this dynamic. His ability to influence others, even in a controlled environment under observation by professionals, is simply amazing, notes psychotherapist Carla Meyer. He identifies weaknesses flawlessly, chooses precise words and gestures, and builds trust relationships in the shortest time. These are outstanding manipulation skills, especially considering his age. In June 2020, Lucas's parents made a difficult decision. After numerous consultations with lawyers and psychologists, they officially renounced their parental rights. This decision enabled Hannah, the younger sister, to completely change her identity and begin a new life under state protection, without connection to her brother's history. This was their final act to protect their daughter, comments family lawyer Michael Bauer. They recognized that Lucas would never change, and that his obsession with his sister could pose a danger even from within the walls of the institution. By renouncing their parental rights for both children, they enabled Hannah to obtain a new identity that is inaccessible to her brother. By the end of 2020, the residents of Waldstadt gradually returned to normal life. The Schwarz family house was sold, the new owners completely rebuilt it and eliminated all memories of the former inhabitants. The district council provided funds for playground renovation and installation of additional surveillance cameras. A psychological screening program for all students was introduced at the school. We are trying to move on, but this case has changed our community forever, says District Council Chairman Hans Weber. Parents have become more vigilant, children play less unsupervised. An uncomfortable awareness has emerged that sometimes danger can look completely harmless, like an ordinary boy from the neighboring house. Meanwhile, the team of psychiatrists continued working with Lucas, gradually adapting therapy methods to his unique case. By summer 2021, 2 years after his arrest, doctors' reports showed extremely limited progress. Lucas had learned the language of therapy, could say the right things, but objective tests showed no real changes in his emotional sphere. In August 2021, the institution's administration discovered that Lucas had somehow gained access to scientific publications about his own case. Excerpts from medical journals analyzing the peculiarities of his mental condition were found in his room. In the margins of these texts, he made methodical notes and corrected inaccuracies in the description of his methods and motives. That was a turning point, believes Dr. Schneider. We understood that he views the entire situation as a kind of academic competition. He studies us with the same clinical interest with which we study him. In one of his notes, he refers to himself as a misunderstood researcher and us as limited observers unable to evaluate the scope of the experiment. In September 2021, a psychiatric expert opinion presented the court with a long-term prognosis of Lucas Schwarz's condition. The document stated that the patient exhibits stable psychopathic traits that are resistant to therapy. Particular concern was raised by the fact that his manipulative abilities and camouflage skills only became perfected with increasing age. The prognosis in this case is extremely unfavorable, concludes Dr. Kramer. We are dealing with a combination of factors that create a perfect storm: congenital psychopathy, exceptional intelligence, the absence of neurobiological empathy mechanisms, early fixation on violence as a form of research. Added to this is his ability for long-term planning and camouflage, which only improves. He learns from his mistakes and analyzes the methods of his detection to avoid them in the future. On the 30th of October 2021, the court decided to extend Lucas Schwarz's placement in a closed institution indefinitely, with annual reassessment of his condition. A special point of the decision stated that, upon reaching the 18th year of age, a new comprehensive expert opinion will be prepared to decide on his transfer to an adult facility with appropriate security regime. Currently, Lucas Schwarz continues to remain in a specialized closed institution. He is 12 years old. According to the latest staff reports, he spends most of his time reading scientific literature that is made available to him in limited format. He shows particular interest in neurobiology, psychology, and criminology. He behaves exemplarily, follows all rules, and maintains polite but distant relationships with staff. In December 2021, during a routine inspection of his room, a carefully hidden sheet of paper was discovered. On it, in Lucas' handwriting, was a list of dates beginning with January 2028, the time when he will turn 18. This was followed by numbered points under the heading Phase 2. The content of these points remains secret and is not disclosed even in official case documents. This is not just a list of plans by an adolescent dreaming of freedom, comments investigator Hoffman, who examined the document. The details and methodology give serious cause for concern that the story of Lucas Schwarz is not yet over. He is not just waiting for adulthood, he is actively preparing for something he calls Phase 2. On the 16th of January 2022, Dr. Schneider noted in his report the final assessment. After 2.5 years of intensive work with the patient, I conclude that we are dealing with a new, previously unclassified type of psychopathic personality. Traditional therapy methods show no effectiveness. The only realistic strategy is long-term isolation and control. It must be understood that the patient actively studies the system in which he finds himself, identifies its weaknesses, and probably develops long-term plans. His chronological age should not be misleading. Intellectually and in terms of manipulative abilities, he functions at the level of a highly developed adult. Specialists continue to study this unprecedented case in the hope of developing effective therapy and prevention methods. So far, however, everything indicates that Lucas Schwarz represents a unique phenomenon, a perfect storm of genetic, neurobiological, and psychological factors that have created what one researcher called psychopathy in pure form. For Lucas' victims and their families, life goes on, but the consequences of his actions are felt to this day. Most affected children continue to visit psychologists. Many experienced symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Sophia Wagner, who nearly became his last victim, moved with her parents to another city and changed schools. And in the old basement of the abandoned house on the outskirts of Waldstadt where it all began, police regularly conduct inspections. Although the room is sealed and inaccessible to unauthorized persons, traces of intruders are discovered there every few months. Someone comes there to see the place where a young person began his experiments that transform the quiet suburb into a place of collective trauma.